Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, July 23rd, 2024, and today the Democratic Party just got a piece of news that they have desperately wanted over the past 6 months, and that is a new national poll showing Kamala Harris with a 2-point victory over former President Trump in a head-to-head matchup in the first set of polls being released since the announcement of President Biden's departure from the race and Vice President Harris's winning of the nomination and assuming the role of the Democratic nominee for this coming November. Now, Reuters and Ipsos have been doing polls for months on end now about the 2024 presidential election. For a bit of context, 2 weeks ago, they saw a poll that showed Kamala Harris tied, running even, with former President Trump. It also showed President Trump defeating President Biden by roughly 2 percentage points. In what is largely seen, a 2-point swing from the results just 2 weeks ago and a 4-point swing in the performance compared to President Biden, Reuters and Ipsos give Kamala Harris her first victory in any set of polls that we've seen conducted over this election cycle. Now, Democrats should look at this and say that this isn't exactly the place that they would like to be in November, but certainly is a far better starting point than where they were with President Biden. With all this conversation around polling, it is clear today that President Biden does in fact perform worse than President Trump, and while that wasn't, than Vice President Harris, and while that wasn't as consistent as before, we can see that in the head-to-head matchup here, it seems to be running now, Kamala Harris running ahead 1.5% better than where President Biden was when he ended his bid. Now, this won't be the perfect metric to take a look at. We will have far more factors impacting whether Harris would do better than Biden, but from here on out, we can use that final standing point for President Biden against President Trump, a 3.1% advantage that the former president had over the incumbent president, as a standing metric to see where Democrats have come from the initial announcement of President Biden leaving the race. Now, Kamala Harris being up 2 points in the recent poll does conflict with the average we've seen over the past month. But the good news for Democrats is that in practically all of the polls conducted since the announcement of Harris into the race, just two, Morning Consult and Reuters and Ipsos, show roughly a tie between the two contenders, far better than being down 3 points nationally. The good news, too, Morning Consult actually conducted a poll before, showing Donald Trump with a 1-point advantage over Kamala Harris that has expanded to 2 points. But when you compare it to President Biden, you can see that the numbers were getting far worse for him over this period of time. For instance, Morning Consult had Trump up by 2 against President Biden, but the most recent Morning Consult one had Trump up by 4. And so again, as a point of comparison, running ahead of Biden by roughly 2 points, and that's roughly a 1.5% advantage here, goes to show that while it may not be as strong as it was for Harris 2 weeks ago, we also see Reuters and Ipsos contending with that. The same poll that they released that showed Donald Trump ahead that now show Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump. So we're in a really, really unique scenario where we have far few polls in the early stages of this introduction to a presidential bid, but it's not bad news for Kamala Harris. She's in a position where being ahead 44-42 is probably a very good starting point for someone who has had no national structure, no national campaign. I get it. She was the vice president, but I'm becoming more and more of a believer in the fact that Kamala Harris has room to grow, where Donald Trump has largely hit his ceiling. And the reason why I was initially apprehensive about that was because Kamala Harris, for all intents and purposes, had a nationalized brand. But as the vice president, never as the VP, as the presidential nominee, never as someone who was taking the helm of the ticket. And the most we ever saw in consideration that Kamala Harris was, actually running the White House was right-wing speculation from Fox News and One American News Network and Newsmax and different organizations. But grounded in reality, it was very obvious that Kamala Harris was not calling the shots in the administration or in the campaign. But now that has changed. Kamala Harris is at the helm of everything, and it is clear that there is a lot of enthusiasm behind her as we see that donations have now topped $100 million for just the Harris campaign. I made a video yesterday talking about how Democrats have raised $100 million. That is true, but now Kamala Harris has raised $100 million. Yesterday, 81% of that $100 million went to Kamala Harris. This time around, you're finding that Kamala Harris herself has raised over $100 million. So a pretty good standpoint, a pretty good position to be for Kamala Harris by every metric. I mean, this is phenomenal in terms of fundraising data, but that actually finds it to be even better for Harris, which again extends to this point that she has not yet hit her ceiling and that she has far more room to grow than President Biden. We also see, too, that fundraising isn't just happening from different sides of the left. You're seeing targeted campaigns from the Democratic Party to fundraise amongst different minority groups. Kamala Harris, in this instance, raised a lot of money on a Zoom meeting yesterday and the day before with black women across the country. Now, black men are doing a lot of fundraising for Kamala Harris. Very, very strong for the incumbent vice president. Not to mention that it isn't just minority groups that are being targeted. Swing states are being targeted, too. Now, Democrats are seeing a 100 times increase in daily signups for the Kamala Harris campaign compared to what they saw on the daily average for President Biden. Meaning that Kamala Harris is seeing thousands upon thousands, 28,000 people have signed up in the past 24 hours, 48 hours to work for the Kamala Harris for President campaign. That is quite significant. I mean, you're talking a huge chunk of people, and where are they coming from? The campaigns are targeting swing states, and swing state voters and people are signing up to be in this position, to work for Kamala Harris, to open a field office, to get people to the ballot box, to get people engaged in the election. It's unlike anything Democrats have seen this election cycle, and they should be quite excited about it. Now, when you also take a look, too, at what we're finding on the left is that there's a unification. There is a full and total endorsement of Kamala Harris from members of the left wing. Delegates are saying Kamala Harris is going to be our nominee, and guess what? Delegates secured her the spots to get the Democratic nomination. Now, because Joe Biden has withdrawn himself from the race, it allows all of his delegates to remain in this, what we call to be, in theory, an open convention, but a first round of voting, meaning they can choose a nominee quickly and easily without any external nominations or any type of drama at the convention. It's going to be pretty simple for Kamala Harris to get through here as long as she had the numbers. Well, now national numbers show across the nation, Kamala Harris has enough votes. She has enough delegates to secure this nomination. It'll be a one and done. The round one will happen and nothing else will happen. So Democrats are in a very strong position to nominate Kamala Harris, make her go from the VP nomination to the presidential nomination. And this is something that we rarely ever see, which is a complete and total unification of Democratic leadership, Democratic staffers, Democratic representatives, whoever it might be. It is very rare. And we even saw it with President Biden, who sought to run for re-election himself, faced opposition within his own party. Representatives across the country called for him to step down. Senators called for him to step down. Major contenders from past elections, past presidential races have found themselves in positions where now they're up in the air about President Biden. But he put all that to rest by saying, I'm stepping down from the race. Kamala Harris will take my spot. Now here she comes in and secures enough endorsements, and it looks like the Democratic Party is entirely unified. Now, on the point of fundraising, which I want to get to electability in just a moment, and the whole idea of bringing in a new VP, ActBlue ticker has been tracking contributions over the past 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. In fact, they've been tracking ActBlue since September 2020. Well, on the 21st of July, marked the second highest day in fundraising in Democratic Party history. The day after was even higher. Kamala Harris announced that she would be taking up the role as the presidential nominee. Joe Biden stepped down on July 21st. So in just 3 days, Democrats have raised, since the announcement of President Biden, $128 million. I kid you not, $158 million nationwide. What an insane number. But one that honestly is entirely because of this brand new set of enthusiasm, energy, commitment to an election that many Democrats initially thought was going to go away. Now, this doesn't even count the Future Forward PAC, which raised $150 million as well as a super PAC. ActBlue is directly associated with Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party, the DNC, that's ActBlue. Everywhere else are super PACs, major political organizations that were finding themselves raising tens of millions, over $100 million in the Future Forward PAC for the Democratic Party that is now committed to Kamala Harris's reelection. Meaning that based on this announcement and Joe Biden's departure from the race, it was nearly $350 million directly funneled into this campaign. Other good news for Democrats, and I promise we'll move on from fundraising in just a moment, 67% of those who donated to Kamala Harris, first-time donors ever, meaning that they have never donated to anybody in the history of themselves. People who had spent decades voting for Democrats now sending money. They didn't do it in 2016. They didn't even do it in 2020. They did it for the first time in 2024 for Vice President Harris. This is an energy shift. This is something new to people. This is something new to the election and will put Kamala Harris in a very strong position, and early numbers are indicating exactly that. Now, why the race will still be close. Kamala Harris is using this momentum to gain in the support of voters nationwide. But she has another secret weapon, and it isn't the Democratic convention. It's who she chooses as vice president. She has a plethora of good options, people who could bring tremendous value to a ticket, because Kamala Harris is another candidate that the Trump campaign has known would be on the ticket no matter what happened before November. And so the Trump team has gathered a lot of research and understanding and feels as if they are ready to take her on as a presidential, or even in that case, what they thought initially, as a vice presidential nominee. But what they aren't ready for, and they could have never been ready for, is the possibility of who Kamala Harris chooses as vice president. Well, quite frankly, she has a very strong crop of people who could bring her very much closer to the finish line. And let's take a look at some of those names and exactly why it feeds directly into this 2-point advantage, likely expanding depending on who she chooses for vice president. So the first option is Governor Josh Shapiro, Pennsylvania governor who was elected in a landslide victory in 2022. This is a state Biden won in 2020 by a margin of just 1.2% in a state that Trump won by a margin of 1% back in 2016. So it is a competitive state. Josh Shapiro won in this state by over 15 points in the last election, 15 points. Josh Shapiro being considered as the potential nominee for vice president, very, very popular in this state. The only downside here, he's been a single-term governor. He hasn't even finished his full term. However, similar to Kamala Harris, served as the state's attorney general and has a reputation for that. Governor Roy Cooper of the state of North Carolina is also in contention. He also comes from a crucial battleground state, and he was elected in 2016 in the same ballot that Donald Trump was and re-elected in the same one that Donald Trump won across the state of North Carolina. Democrats look at him and say he brings a lot to the ticket, especially from a battleground state that we hadn't won since 2008. The only downside, if he was to leave the state because of state laws, the lieutenant governor would become the acting governor. And that lieutenant governor is one of the most extreme Republicans in the entire nation. Meaning every time Roy Cooper left the state, it would allow Mark Robinson, the lieutenant governor, to wreak havoc for Democrats across the state legislature, across the state lines. It would be very bad for Democrats in the state, which is the only real reason I could see why they decide not to move forward with Roy Cooper. Mark Kelly, senator from Arizona, brings a lot to the ticket from Arizona, a region that Biden previously seemed to not write off, but not treat as if it's going to be as close and competitive as the Rust Belt region for him. Mark Kelly could bring numbers to a state like Arizona. Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky, he brings in an Appalachian view of this country, a very new type of view to a Democratic ticket. Very rare that you see Kentucky, residents, Kentucky politicians ending up on the Democratic side of things. Andy Beshear could also provide a new set of context to this election. I think he would be great with Kamala Harris in terms of electability. Now, J.B. Pritzker, Pete Buttigieg, Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, these seem to be names that really aren't actually in consideration. They might be getting vetting paperwork, but I can tell you now they will not be chosen, any of them, as the vice presidential nominee. Kamala Harris is in a position where she could really, really, really do well with the right VP pairing, and it shows that she is already doing far better than President Biden. A 4-point swing, that's something. A 4-point swing nationally means a lot for national Democrats, especially being down 3 points nationally against Biden. A 4-point swing consistently would bring Harris up for the first time Republicans have ever been losing the national in a head-to-head matchup against Donald Trump of this election. I mean, we're sort of seeing Donald Trump having the Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden treatment where he leads in national polls every day. Not a single day does the opposition candidate actually get up, and it actually might start to happen with Vice President Harris. Now, there's a lot more that we need to understand, and I think Kamala Harris is in a position where this momentum can be ridden into a more expansive victory, where 2 points turns into 4 points, and 4 points turns into 5 points, and 5 points turns into 7 points, where a lead could be resumed back to where it was back in 2020, assuming Democrats play their cards correctly. Now, don't forget, Democrats have a history of losing elections that should be winnable, and so do Republicans. But this is an election that no one can really predict. So Democrats need to be on their A game. They made the right decision with President Biden departing from the race. That was obviously the right decision, especially if the incumbent president made it himself. We know one thing about Biden, and it's that he knows when to dig his heels in if he knows he can actually win a race. It's clear here that it seems like he did not believe he was going to win this race, and that Kamala Harris would have a far better shot. Given that the data now shows Kamala Harris ahead by 2 points nationally, I'd agree that she has a far better shot than someone who was losing nationally by roughly 3 points. But reflecting on the former presidential nominee and also the incumbent president doesn't do much good. I think what we really need to understand here is that Kamala Harris has momentum. She has room to grow, and she has a VP nomination and an entire Democratic convention and one more presidential debate. Donald Trump said today to reporters that he would debate Vice President Harris. And so it'll be really fascinating to watch. That debate is going to be so closely watched, likely watched more than the first presidential debate. Everything about this election has been entirely shaken up. Kamala Harris takes the lead in the first major poll that we've seen released in the most recent major poll, showing Kamala Harris with a 2-point advantage over Donald Trump when polls for months before had showed Biden and Harris losing against the former president. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. I created a new end screen for this video. I talked about how I would have to change the Joe Biden one. Very much did not imagine I would be changing any of my end screens for any of my videos, but here I am today. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. And on the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.